Today we examine the theology of a 2005 Ang Lee film, Brokeback Mountain, in an effort to better understand a commonly cited passage in Paul's letter to the Romans. So what would be considered by the Christian tradition the major sin portrayed in this movie? Well, how about some honorable mentions first?
What exactly is Pentecost?
When the world ends and fellas like you and me march off to hell.
That's not Pentecost.
You may be a sinner, but I ain't yet had the opportunity.
You know I ain't queer.
Me neither.
You may kiss a bride, and if you don't, I will.
Ain't got no work for you.
Look at this crowd. There's gonna be a lot of pussy on the hoof in a crowd like this.
Friends of Donald Trump?
Makes me nervous not to take no precaution.
Defendant is ordered to pay child support.
Boys should watch football.
You sit down, you old son of a bitch!
This is a goddamn bitch of an unsatisfactory situation.
So yeah, lots of sin. But is there one that I failed to mention that you would argue is the most evil in the film? Well, if you're thinking homosexuality, you're on the right path, but not in the way you might think. To illustrate my point, let's take a look at Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verses 26 to 27. For this reason, God gave them up for degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. The historical context of this passage is Paul talking about Gentiles participating in festivals centered around the worship of pagan gods. In other words, idol worship. A sin that Paul acknowledges in the following chapter that even the Jews were guilty of committing during the Old Testament era. As part of these pagan rituals, it was customary to engage in drunken, drug-induced, orgiastic behavior. Kind of like what Roman Saturnalia used to look like before it became Christianized into the Christmas holiday. So when Grandma says Christmases aren't like what they used to be, she ain't lying. In the context of this passage, Paul is making the case that when one turns to idol worship, the world is turned upside down and inside out. People going against their nature. Or what Dr. Venkman would say,
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
What is vital to understanding this passage are the original Greek words for exchanged, nature, and unnatural. The Greek word for exchange has been translated to leaving, change, and abandon, depending on which Bible you're reading. This pericope refers to people who are exchanging their inborn or normal behavior for same-sex activities. That is, presumably, they are deviating from their heterosexual nature to engage in relations with members of the same sex. The second word, nature, translates to inborn, produced by nature, agreeable to nature. Dr. Thomas Thurston argues nature in this context does not refer to natural law, but rather a person's or group's character. He claims a more appropriate translation is the word conventions, or simply what is normal to them. And finally, the word unnatural is best translated as unconventional, which is how Paul uses the term in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and Romans chapter 11 in referring to growing your hair long and Jews and Gentiles living together respectively. Many psychologists, human sexuality researchers, mental health experts say that homosexual and bisexual orientations are indeed normal, inborn, and natural for a percentage of people. Thurston explains that refusal to recognize the true God results in false God, false word, false self-awareness, and false perspectives on human activity. In short, Paul is saying that it is sinful for a heterosexual to give up his heterosexual nature to engage in homosexual relations, and it would thus be equally sinful for a homosexual to go against who he or she is to give into relations with someone of the opposite sex. And that brings us to the gravest sin of Brokeback Mountain. The fact that two homosexual males marry heterosexually. This was unfair to themselves, to each other, to their wives and children. And this is why the movie ends with nobody smiling. For where there is sin, there is separation. And society's conventions led to this ending. You can see throughout the film the guilt, the pain, the repression of Ennis's character. Not allowing himself to act on his nature was utterly destroying who he was. And ultimately, who he and Jack were called to be. What other theological messages can we glean from this film? In the Bible, mountains are typical sites for theophanies, manifestations of God. These men only seem to experience peace, joy, and dare I say love on this mountain. Victor Hugo once wrote, "To love another person is to see the face of God." The setting of a mountain was Ennis and Jack's heaven. and indeed was a site of a theophany for them. And if you're not convinced by what I'm saying today, how about the very fact that Jack's name literally means God is gracious? And I can't help but think of that name in connection to the lamb and shepherd imagery we see throughout this film. Right after the men are first intimate with each other, Ennis comes across a slaughtered lamb, an innocent lamb that was mauled by predators. And at the end of this film, Jack's character was also slaughtered, mauled by predators who did not agree with who he was. Jack was once the shepherd, but ended up innocently having to lay his life down as a lamb to the slaughter, an image quite familiar to any Christian watching this episode. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video. If you believe there was anything that I said today that had some merit to it, please go ahead and click like there below, subscribe to this channel, and more importantly, if you know anybody out there who is wrestling with their faith and their sexual orientation, please share this video, share this channel with them. They are my ministry, they are the reason why I'm doing this, and the word needs to get out.